We originally planned to stay only one night in Port St. John's, but after looking at some beautiful beach pictures, we decided to stay an extra night. This beach looks anything but beautiful. Instead of blue turquoise waters, it looks like a muddy river. Why does the water look so muddy and full of debris? The Mzimvubu River flows through a gorge known as the Gates of St. John's into an estuary located on the Indian Ocean. It is one of the most important rivers in Africa. It is about 250 miles long. Mzimvubu means place of the hippopotamus. For 3 days prior to arriving at Port St. John's, there were very heavy rains in the Eastern Cape, which caused the river to flood and carry the muddy waters and the debris into the estuary, causing it to look anything but beautiful. This estuary that we are walking around is located just in front of Fisherman's Cave, where we stayed. We are now on the other side of the river in the town of Port St. John's. Port St. John's is a town of about 6,500 people, located in the Eastern Cape Province on the Wild Coast. I've heard there's a first for everything. Well, this was the first for us. We've been to a lot of beaches, but this is the first time I found a cow laying down on the beach. A few notes about safety. When we showed our route to our tour guide, Tice, his comments were, it looked like a beautiful route, but beware, once you leave the Western Cape, the roads are not very good. In addition, there is a lot of crime between Port Elizabeth and Port St. John's. Do not stop in that area, don't get out of your car, and don't pick up hitchhikers. Despite our respect for Tice's advice, we broke all 3 of these. We stopped in several places, walked around at least one town on the way there, and picked up 3 hitchhikers. When we got to our room, our hostess told us that Port St. John's is probably the safest place in Africa. She never locks her house or car, and everything is safe. Information on the internet confirmed that Port St. John is one of the safest places in South Africa, and perhaps all of Africa. I would like to add that several of the workers in South Africa, and particularly around St. John's, had to walk 5 or 6 miles one way to work each day. If we could be just a small blessing and save them that walk, it was well worth picking up some hitchhikers. We also had some very interesting conversations with them. Besides snooping around the town a bit, we visited a small museum. It had some interesting artwork, all from local artists, some artifacts and pictures, all relating to the Wild Coast. It also had a lot of information about the sinking of the MTS Oceanos, which sank in 1991 off the coast of Port St. John's. It was international news, primarily because the captain of the ship and the crew abandoned the ship in a lifeboat, leaving the 581 passengers and entertainers to defend for themselves. A group called Coast sang about the sinking. A shortened version of the song. This is a comment that Crystal Crusader wrote 1 year ago about the song. It's 2022 and I still listen to this song. The story of the Oceanos is to this day one of my favorite nonfiction stories of all time. The fact that such a large ship filled with passengers not only sank, but was completely abandoned by the crew, and yet, thanks to the help of the entertainment staff, not a single life was lost, is just incredible. Truly one of the most amazing and heartwarming stories of all time. It could have been another Titanic tragedy, but instead, it was a triumphant tale of heroes, the captain being punished for their cowardice, and all lived to tell the tale. Amazing story and amazing song. And let's not forget the entertainment staff and rescue teams who took charge to make it happen. You gotta love it. After finishing our tour of the museum, we took a drive up into the mountains. It is Saturday, October 29th, and we are starting our drive of 377 miles to Dundee. It is one of our more interesting drives, as a great part of the day is spent in the mountains. The drawback was that about half of the trip was in very heavy fog, and we could not see anything.
The heat of the dust in the African day. Riverbeds are crusted into clay. From the Kalahari to the Cape of Storms, we know the drought from the day we're born. Dust in your eyes, it's the dust on your skin. Dances the dance of the heat on the horizon. When the tension is tight as the skin on the polar sky, rivers beginning to roll as the temperature rises. varrelwind voor het aan haar kring. En ons laatste druppel hoop. Stafverkering, stafverkering, stafverkering. There's a pause in the pulse, you can feel the earth take a breath. Summon a strength in a hope that hardly has a laugh. In a flashing of a light, you can see the thunder clouds roll. Call to the depths of the well that you hide in your soul. Varrelwind voor het aan haar kring. En ons laatste druppel hoop. Stafverkering, stafverkering, stafverkering. Sweetest smell of all, the old men say, as the first drops fall from the grave, when they join the sullen children at their game, dancing the shuffle circle dance in the warm rain. Dancing the shuffle circle dance.
We have arrived at our destination, the Kwakunya Bed and Breakfast in Dundee. It was a great choice, as the village and rooms had a definite African setting, and the breakfast was great. We were wondering when we saw the door if this was a pygmy village. There are two reasons why the Zulu people had small doors. The first one was to pay homage to the home by bowing as they entered the home. The second reason was, in case of intruders, they would hit them in the head as they bowed their head coming in the door. We primarily went to Dundee to see two battlefield sites, the Battle of Isandlwana and the Battle of Rorke's Drift. The Battle of Isandlwana was the beginning of the Anglo-Zulu War. The battle took place on January 22, 1879. This was about 2.5 years after the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and there were a number of similarities. First of all, both armies featured an established government versus a group of indigenous people. In the Battle of the Little Bighorn, it was the U.S. 7th Cavalry against the Sioux and Cheyenne Indians. In the Battle of Isandlwana, it was the British Army versus the Zulu Nation. In both cases, the established nations were overconfident, arrogant, and assured of victory, but both were very soundly defeated. In both cases, the armies were greatly outnumbered. In the case of Isandlwana, there were about 20,000 Zulus against about 1,800 British. There were no 7th Cavalry survivors at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and very few British survivors at Isandlwana. Of the 1,800 soldiers, over 1,300 were killed. There was a movie made about the battle in 1979 called Zululand, starring Burt Lancaster and Peter O'Toole. As we drive through the area where the Battle of Isandlwana took place, and then visit Rorke's Drift, where the second battle took place, we will listen to a brief description of the battle.
This is Isandlwana Mountain in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. On the 22nd of January 1879, this was the scene of one of the worst defeats ever suffered by the British Army during its long era of colonial wars. And I'll give you an overview of one of the most famous battles in British history. Early in the morning on the 11th of January 1879, Lord Chelmsford's centre column crosses the Buffalo River here at Rorke's Drift to begin the invasion of Zululand. So one of the biggest talking points of the battle is that the British made no serious defensive measures. They did not laager the wagons as the Boers would have done, i.e. form them into a defensive perimeter, nor did they make sangers from rocks. To me it shows that the British were overconfident and massively underestimated their Zulu opponents. At 4:30 in the morning on the 21st of January, a strong reconnaissance patrol is sent out to look for the Zulu army. This force is mainly comprised of Zulu auxiliaries and is commanded by Commandant Rupert Lonsdale. In the late afternoon they discover a large Zulu force right here and engage them. They're forced to bed down for the night, and Lonsdale sends messengers to Lord Chelmsford implying that the main Zulu impi has been discovered. It's the break that Chelmsford has been hoping for. Desperate to bring the enemy to battle, he splits his force. He leaves camp with the majority of the 2nd 24th, 4 of his 6 artillery pieces, the Imperial Mounted Infantry and the Native Pioneer Company. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pullane of the 1st 24th is now in charge at Isandlwana. At approximately 10 a.m, Colonel Durnford and his mounted black troops now arrive from Rorke's Drift. Technically, Durnford is senior to Pullane, but his is an independent command and his priority is to look for and engage the Zulus. He isn't concerned with defending Isandlwana itself. So while this was happening, where was the Zulu impi, the Zulu army? Well, with home field advantage, they have used the terrain to expertly manoeuvre unnoticed to within striking distance of the British camp. They've mustered around 20,000 warriors, hard men, drilled from an early age in the use of their assegai stabbing spears and their cowhide shields.
The main Zulu force was discovered at around 11 a.m, who chased a number of Zulus into a valley, only then seeing most of the 20,000 men of the main enemy force sitting in total quiet. Having been discovered, the Zulu force leapt to the offensive. Pullane sent companies of the 24th Foot into an extended firing line, with the aim of meeting the Zulu attack head-on and checking it with firepower.
By the time the battle was finished, over 1,300 British were killed, or 72% of the force, and many more were seriously wounded. It was one of the worst defeats in the history of the British Army. The Battle of Rorke's Drift, or the Defense of Rorke's Drift, took place right after the British defeat at Isandlwana, but with a different result. After 12 hours of bitter fighting, the Zulu warriors withdrew. Over 3,000 Zulu warriors attacked about 400 British. 17 British soldiers were killed, and almost all of them had some sort of wound. Between 300 to 500 Zulus were killed. Rorke's Drift was a Swedish mission. A 1964 movie called Zula was made about the battle. A walk around the grounds at Rorke's Drift. A few animals that were in the area around Rorke's Drift. The direct cause of the Battle of Isandlwana occurred when the British Army crossed the Buffalo River, which was a dividing line between the British and the Zulus. The Tunnel Museum was located right next to the Kenya B&B where we stayed. It was a huge museum with several buildings and outside exhibits, but its main focus was on coal mining, which was the main industry in the Dundee area for several years. We did not enjoy visiting the museums as much as we did viewing the wildlife and the natural scenery of Africa. However, by visiting several museums, we learned a lot about African history and economic geography, as well as other things.